The rain lashed against the grimy window of the small cafe, mimicking the chaos that had unexpectedly erupted in Alara's life. She'd always believed in the quiet rhythm of her existence: early mornings at the bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar, evenings spent lost in classic novels. Her world was a meticulously organized collection of predictable moments, a stark contrast to the sudden, jarring encounter that had ripped through her carefully constructed peace. It had been a fleeting moment, a mere breath in time, yet the memory of his eyes, dark and fathomless like a midnight sea, had stubbornly clung to her, a phantom presence she couldn't shake. He was a force of nature, a dangerous storm she'd unwittingly stumbled into, and now, weeks later, the silence of his absence was almost as unsettling as his sudden appearance. She thought he would forget her, a fleeting red-haired woman in a forgettable alleyway, but a chilling premonition whispered that he was not the kind of man who forgot anything. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Alara's routine was her anchor. Every morning, before the city truly woke, she'd walk the brisk few blocks to the Gilded Spatula, her small, independent bakery, a haven of warmth and sweet aromas amidst the steel and glass canyons of downtown. Her hands, usually dusted with flour, were nimble, her movements precise. She found comfort in the tangible, the creation of something beautiful and delicious from simple ingredients. Her life was modest, but rich in its own way. She had built her dream from the ground up, a testament to her resilience and unwavering work ethic. She lived in a cozy, if slightly cramped, apartment above a florist, the scent of fresh blooms often wafting through her open window. It was a simple life, a good life, and one she had fought hard to protect. The incident had unfolded on a Tuesday, a day that had begun with the promise of a perfect batch of croissants. She had been taking out the bins, the city's cacophony muted by the alleyway's enclosed walls, when the sharp crack of a gunshot had ripped through the air. Her heart had hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then, a man, tall and imposing even as he slumped against the brick, a dark stain blossoming on his crisp white shirt. And then him. He had emerged from the shadows, a figure carved from granite, his presence dominating the narrow space. His suit, impeccably tailored, seemed to absorb the dim light, making him appear even more formidable. He hadn't noticed her at first, his attention solely on the wounded man, a quiet intensity radiating from him. But then, his gaze had flickered, caught on her, frozen in the doorway, a forgotten bin clutched in her trembling hands. His eyes, she remembered with a vividness that still made her breath catch, were the color of rich, dark coffee, deep and intelligent, yet holding a dangerous glint, like a predator assessing its prey. A scar, thin and almost imperceptible, etched a faint line above his left eyebrow, a testament to a past she could only imagine. He hadn't said a word, merely held her gaze for what felt like an eternity, a silent question passing between them. The air had crackled with an unspoken tension, a raw, primal awareness that transcended the chaos of the moment. It was a look that promised both danger and an undeniable, magnetic pull. She had been a witness, an inconvenient, unexpected variable in a scene clearly not meant for civilian eyes. He hadn't threatened her, not explicitly, but the message in his gaze was clear: you saw nothing. You say nothing. Yet, there was something else there, too. A flicker of something unreadable, a fleeting curiosity in her wide, frightened eyes, a spark of recognition that disturbed her to her core. He had a harsh, angular face, sharp cheekbones and a strong jawline, but his lips, surprisingly full, held a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. A silent promise, perhaps, or a silent warning. The men with him, equally imposing, had moved with an efficiency that suggested long practice, spiriting the wounded man away as if he were a ghost. The alley was left eerily silent, the only evidence of the recent violence a faint metallic tang in the damp air. She had stood there, rooted to the spot, until the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. By the time the police arrived, she could only offer a vague, stammering account, her mind still replaying the man's intense stare. She hadn't seen enough to be truly helpful, and a powerful, instinctual urge had warned her to keep what little she had seen, and felt, to herself. For weeks, Alara had tried to relegate the encounter to the darkest corners of her memory. She'd thrown herself into her work, baking with a fervor that bordered on obsession, hoping to knead away the lingering unease. But his image, the scent of expensive cologne, that had somehow permeated the alley, the silent intensity of his gaze, refused to fade. She'd found herself scanning faces in crowds, her heart leaping at the sight of a dark suit, a fleeting hope or fear that he would reappear. It was a ridiculous notion, she told herself. He was a man from a world she didn't belong to, a world of shadows and violence, and she was a baker, a woman who dealt in flour and sugar. Their paths had crossed by accident, a cosmic anomaly, and they would never cross again. Or so she desperately hoped. Her friend, Chloe, a vibrant artist with an insatiable appetite for gossip and drama, had tried to pry details from her, sensing Alara's unusual quietness. But Alara had deflected, offering only a vague account of some trouble in the alley. The trouble in the alley had been more than just some trouble. It had been a tectonic shift, subtly altering the landscape of Alara's inner world. She knew, deep down, that she hadn't merely witnessed a crime, she had been observed, catalogued, by a man who saw everything. The thought was both terrifying and, to her utter bewilderment, strangely captivating. She scolded herself for it, for the illicit thrill that mingled with her fear, but the truth was, her quiet life suddenly felt duller, somehow, in his absence. She'd always prided herself on her practicality, her grounded nature, yet this man, this dangerous stranger, had awakened something primal within her. Weeks bled into a month, then 2. The bakery thrived, the city hummed its familiar tune, and Alara slowly, cautiously, began to believe her initial assessment: he had forgotten her. He was a man of power, of consequence, and she was a momentary blip on his radar, quickly dismissed. The relief was immense, a heavy weight lifting from her chest, allowing her to breathe freely again. She started to sleep better, the vivid dreams of dark eyes and silent threats receding. Her hands, once prone to trembling when she thought of him, now moved with their usual confident grace as she sculpted dough or drizzled icing. Life, it seemed, had returned to its predictable, comforting rhythm. Then came the letter. It arrived one crisp autumn morning, nestled among her usual stack of bills and bakery supply catalogs. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with no return address, and addressed to her in elegant, looping script that seemed too formal for anything good. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open, a cold premonition snaking through her veins. Inside, a single, heavy card. No words, just an address and a time, embossed in gold. And a small, almost imperceptible symbol in the corner, a stylized lion's head, its mane flowing like waves. It was a symbol she didn't recognize, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to throw it away and pretend it never existed. This was exactly the kind of thing she had feared, the ripple effect of that fateful night. But a deeper, more insistent voice urged her to confront it. What if it was a mistake? What if it was something innocuous? And beneath that, a dangerous curiosity, a whisper of the magnetic pull she had felt in the alley, coaxing her to step closer to the fire. She spent the entire day wrestling with the decision, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety and a strange, undeniable intrigue. By evening, the curiosity had won. She would go. Not out of foolishness, but out of a need to understand, to confront whatever this was, and then, she hoped, to finally put it behind her. The address led her to a part of the city she rarely frequented, an exclusive district where old money and new power resided in elegant brownstones and discreet, high-walled estates. The air here felt different, cleaner, imbued with an unspoken sense of privilege. The specific address was a sprawling, opulent mansion, its stone facade glowing softly under the amber streetlights. A wrought iron gate, intricately designed, stood open, as if expecting her. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. This was no mistake. This was him. She parked her modest, slightly dented car several blocks away, feeling conspicuously out of place among the sleek, expensive vehicles lining the street. As she approached the mansion's imposing front door, she noticed a subtle detail, a small, almost hidden camera mounted above the entrance. She was being watched. Every step felt heavy, each breath a struggle. Before she could even reach for the doorbell, the heavy oak door swung inward, revealing a tall, impeccably dressed man with an impassive expression. He didn't speak, merely gestured for her to enter. The silence was deafening, amplifying the thud of her own heartbeat. Inside, the foyer was vast, a symphony of polished marble, rich mahogany, and subtle, indirect lighting. A grand staircase swept upwards, its banister gleaming. The air was thick with the scent of old money and something else, something vaguely masculine and powerful, like expensive leather and a hint of a unique cologne. It was the same scent she remembered from the alley, a detail that solidified her fear and fueled her resolve. She was not leaving until she understood. The man led her through a series of dimly lit corridors, past rooms filled with art she recognized from museums, and into a spacious, elegantly furnished study. A large, antique desk dominated the room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. And there he was. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, looking out at the city lights. His silhouette was as imposing as she remembered, broad-shouldered and lean, radiating an almost palpable aura of authority. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, emphasizing his powerful physique. The air in the room seemed to hum with his presence, a dangerous energy that both repelled and drew her in. He turned slowly, and her breath hitched. His eyes, those same dark, fathomless eyes, fixed on her, sweeping over her with an intensity that made her feel utterly exposed. There was no surprise in them, no question, only a deep, knowing gaze that suggested he had anticipated her arrival. His face, sharply defined, was unreadable, a mask of controlled power. The scar above his eyebrow was a faint testament to a past she still couldn't fathom. "Alara," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that sent shivers down her spine. It was the first time she had heard his name spoken by him, and it sounded different, imbued with a weight and significance she couldn't understand. "Thank you for coming." His words were polite, almost formal, yet there was an underlying current of command, an unspoken certainty that she would obey. Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her, a small gesture of defiance against the overwhelming presence of the man before her. "You know my name," she managed, her voice a little steadier than she felt. It wasn't a question, but an accusation, a silent protest against the invasion of her privacy. He took a slow step towards her, and the distance, though still considerable, felt like it was shrinking. "I make it a point to know things, Alara. Especially about people who witness unusual events." His lips, surprisingly full, curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was more of a predatory glint, a subtle acknowledgement of his power. "I didn't see anything," she insisted, her chin lifting slightly. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The memory of the wounded man, the cold efficiency of his companions, the sharp crack of the gunshot, it was all burned into her mind. "Perhaps not everything," he conceded, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "But enough. Enough to be a concern." He gestured to a plush leather armchair facing his desk. "Please, sit." Alara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, to flee this opulent cage. But something in his gaze, a quiet challenge, held her rooted. She moved towards the chair, her movements stiff, and perched on the edge, refusing to sink into its luxurious depths. She wouldn't let him see her fear, not entirely. He walked around his desk, his movements fluid and graceful, like a big cat. He settled into the high-backed executive chair, his posture relaxed, yet radiating an undeniable authority. His dark eyes never left hers. "My name is Valerius Thorn," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "And I believe we have some unfinished business." The name, Valerius Thorn, felt ancient and powerful, perfectly suited to the man. It solidified the vague sense of danger she had felt. Unfinished business? Alara echoed, a tremor in her voice. I don't know what you're talking about. I told the police what I saw. Which was very little. I'm just a baker. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the polished desk, his gaze unwavering. A baker who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A baker with a keen eye, I suspect. And a remarkably strong sense of self-preservation, given your silence to the authorities. His words were a veiled compliment, a recognition of her choice, but they also felt like a trap, a subtle manipulation. She bristled. I kept silent because I was scared. Because I didn't want to get involved in whatever that was. Understandable, Valerius replied, a low hum in his voice. Most people would be. But your silence, while self-serving, also served my interests. And that, Alara, creates a certain obligation. Alara's eyes widened. Obligation? I owe you nothing. I didn't ask to be there. I didn't ask to see anything. No, you didn't, he agreed, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. But fate, or perhaps misfortune, intervened. And now, you are connected. Whether you like it or not. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing their weight to settle upon her. The silence in the vast room was oppressive. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate his demands. Money? Information? She had nothing of value to a man like him. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. I need a certain environment to be maintained. A certain level of discretion. Your continued silence is paramount. And in return, I offer you protection. Alara scoffed, a small, involuntary sound. Protection? From what? From you? A corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. From the consequences of what you witnessed. From those who might not be as understanding as I am. This city has many shadows, Alara. And some of them remember faces. The implicit threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the world she had glimpsed. He wasn't just offering protection, he was subtly reminding her of the danger she was already in, a danger he could either mitigate or amplify. It was a masterful display of power, a velvet glove over an iron fist. I don't want your protection, she said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I just want to go back to my life. My bakery. Valerius leaned back in his chair, a sigh escaping his lips, almost a sound of weary patience. Your life, as you knew it, ceased to exist the moment you stepped into that alley. You are no longer an outsider, Alara. You are intertwined. He picked up a small, ornate letter opener from his desk, turning it over in his fingers, his movements deliberate. I have resources. I know about your bakery, the Gilded Spatula. A charming establishment. I know about your apartment above the florist. I know you work hard, that you've built something of your own. Her blood ran cold. He knew everything. The extent of his reach, his surveillance, was terrifying. He wasn't just a random dangerous man, he was a spider, and she had stumbled into his web. Are you threatening me? She demanded, her voice rising, a flicker of genuine anger overriding her fear. His eyes, however, remained calm, almost serene. I am merely stating facts. I am a man who takes care of his interests. And for now, Alara, your continued well-being and your proximity are of interest to me. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that sent a strange warmth through her. It was a contradiction, this hint of something gentler in his otherwise formidable demeanor, and it was deeply unsettling. You are a woman of integrity, I believe. And I find that intriguing. Alara stared at him, bewildered. Intriguing? What did that even mean? Before you Skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. The silence that followed Valerius's words was thick, heavy with unspoken implications. Alara's mind reeled, trying to parse the layers of his statement. He was threatening her, yes, but also complimenting her? Expressing an interest that felt less like a predatory demand and more like a curious observation? The contradiction was jarring, making her feel even more off balance. She clenched her jaw, refusing to show the full extent of her fear. "What exactly do you mean by proximity?" she asked, her voice tight. "Are you holding me here? Am I a prisoner?" Valerius set the letter opener down with a soft click, his gaze unwavering. "A prisoner? No. You are free to leave this house whenever you wish. Alara. But your life, as you've discovered, is no longer entirely your own. The events of that night have woven you into a tapestry you did not choose. And my proximity is simply a means to ensure that tapestry remains intact, and that you remain safe." He leaned back again, his expression unreadable. "I require you to be available. To me. To my people. Should a situation arise where your testimony, or your silence, becomes crucial, I need to know you are within reach. And in exchange, as I said, you have my protection. From anyone who might seek to exploit your knowledge, or simply eliminate a loose end." The word eliminate hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the cold brutality she had witnessed. He wasn't just talking about abstract danger, he was talking about death. Her death. A shiver ran down her spine. Despite her best efforts to control it. "And if I refuse?" she challenged, her voice trembling slightly. Valerius's eyes darkened, a subtle shift that made the air feel colder. "Refusal, Alara, is not a wise option. Not when your safety, and the safety of everything you hold dear, depends on it. Think of it as an arrangement. A necessary one." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face, lingering for a moment on her fiery red hair. "I am not a man who forgets. And I do not allow those who become entangled in my world to simply walk away, leaving threads untied." The implication was clear: if she tried to disappear, he would find her. And the consequences would be dire, not just for her, but for her bakery, her entire carefully constructed life. The realization settled heavily in her stomach, a cold, hard knot. She was trapped. Trapped by a man who was both terrifying and, to her utter dismay, incredibly compelling. His presence filled the room, a magnetic force that both repelled and drew her closer. "So, what does this arrangement entail, precisely?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She felt a strange resignation wash over her, a sense of falling into an abyss she couldn't escape. "For now," Valerius replied, his voice softening just a fraction, "it entails a simple understanding. You do not speak of what you saw. To anyone. Not to the police, not to your friends, not to your family. And you allow my people to keep an eye on you. For your own good, of course." He saw the protest forming on her lips and raised a hand, stopping her. "It is not an invasion of privacy, Alara. It is a safeguard. A reassurance that you are safe, and that our understanding remains solid." The idea of being constantly watched, of having her every move monitored, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Her independence, her carefully guarded solitude, would be utterly compromised. "Watched?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "You mean I'll have shadows following me everywhere? That's not protection, that's surveillance." "A matter of perspective," Valerius countered smoothly. "To some, it is surveillance. To others, it is peace of mind. Knowing that should anything happen, we will know instantly. That we can intervene. Is that not preferable to being completely alone, completely vulnerable, in a world that is far more dangerous than you realize?" His words were persuasive, insidious in their logic. He was painting a picture of a hostile world, then offering himself as the only shield. Alara closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep, shaky breath. She opened them, meeting his intense gaze. And what about my bakery? My life? Am I just supposed to put it all on hold while I wait for whatever this is to blow over? A faint smile touched Valerius's lips, a genuine one this time, though it was still tinged with a predatory edge. On the contrary, Alara. Your life, your bakery, will continue. Uninterrupted. Perhaps even, enhanced. You will find that my protection extends to your interests as well. A rising tide, as they say, lifts all boats. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone that sent a strange warmth through her veins. I have no desire to disrupt your existence, Alara. Only to ensure it continues, safely, within the parameters of our arrangement. There was something in his gaze, a fleeting spark, that hinted at more than just a pragmatic agreement. It was a look of quiet admiration, of something akin to curiosity, even interest. It was a dangerous, alluring contradiction, this man of immense power, of undeniable danger, showing even a hint of gentle regard. She felt a strange pull towards him, a dangerous fascination that warred with her fear. And what if I don't want your enhancements? She challenged, trying to regain some semblance of control. What if I just want to be left alone? Valerius sighed, a soft, almost weary sound. Alara, you are a strong woman. Independent. I respect that. But there are forces at play that are beyond your control, beyond your understanding. You are no longer an innocent bystander. You are involved. And in this world, involvement carries consequences, both good and bad. My proposal is to mitigate the bad, and perhaps, just perhaps, introduce a little of the good. His eyes held hers, a silent challenge, an unspoken promise. The air in the opulent office crackled with an undeniable tension, a fragile bridge between fear and an almost forbidden intrigue. Alara felt a tremor run through her, a strange mix of dread and a nascent curiosity she couldn't suppress. This man, Valerius Thorn, was a walking paradox. A ruthless power, cloaked in tailored suits and a veneer of chilling calm, yet capable of these subtle shifts, these fleeting glimpses of something more. It was like watching a predator pause, not to strike, but to observe, to appreciate the beauty of its prey before the inevitable. She swallowed, her throat dry. And what if I don't agree to be observed? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trying to assert a defiance she barely felt. What then? Valerius's expression hardened, the subtle warmth receding, replaced by the familiar mask of cold authority. Then, Alara, I cannot guarantee your safety. Nor can I guarantee that others, less reasonable than I, will not come looking for the loose end. A loose end that saw too much. Think carefully. Your life, your bakery, everything you've worked for, could be undone by a single careless word, or by simply being unprotected in a city that forgets no one. The threat was clear, delivered with a chilling matter-of-factness that left no room for doubt. It wasn't a question, it was an ultimatum. The weight of his words pressed down on her, suffocating her. She envisioned her small, cozy bakery, the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon, the familiar faces of her regulars. She thought of her quiet apartment, her books, her simple, predictable life. All of it, hanging by a thread held in this man's powerful hand. So, I have no choice, she stated, the realization a bitter taste in her mouth. Valerius leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk once more, his hands clasped. You always have a choice, Alara. But some choices have more favorable outcomes than others. This arrangement, as you call it, offers you security, stability, and a continued existence without fear. The alternative offers very little. He paused, his gaze intense, piercing through her defenses. I understand this is a lot to process. I am not asking for your immediate answer. But I am asking you to consider it. To consider your future, and the forces that now shape it. I will send someone to pick you up tomorrow morning. We will discuss the finer details then. For now, you are free to return home. Think on what I've said. Elara stared at him, a whirlwind of emotion swirling inside her. Fear, anger, frustration, and a bewildering spark of something else, a strange, unsettling fascination with the man who held her fate in his hands. She wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice of it all, but she knew it would be futile. He was an immovable force, and she was merely a pebble in his path. She pushed herself up from the armchair, her legs feeling unsteady. Fine, she choked out, her voice raw. I'll think about it. Valerius inclined his head, a gesture that was both dismissive and acknowledging. He didn't offer a hand, didn't try to soften the blow. He simply watched her, his dark eyes following her every move as she walked towards the door. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the soft click of her heels on the polished marble floor. She reached the ornate double doors, her hand trembling as she grasped the cold brass handle. Just as she was about to open it, his voice, low and resonant, stopped her. Elara. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was still seated, watching her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Remember, he said, his voice a silken thread, I never forget a face. Especially not a captivating one like yours. The words, a strange mix of threat and compliment, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a testament to his power, his ability to disarm and intimidate simultaneously. She didn't respond, simply pushed the doors open and hurried out, needing to escape the suffocating intensity of his presence. The grand hallway felt like a long tunnel leading to freedom, yet she knew it was an illusion. She was still trapped, just in a larger cage. A silent, imposing man in a dark suit, one of Valerius's guards, appeared as if from nowhere, silently guiding her back to the waiting car. The drive back to her modest apartment was a blur. Her mind raced, replaying every word, every nuance of Valerius Thorn's terrifying proposition. The arrangement, the protection, the thinly veiled threats, it all coalesced into a suffocating reality. She unlocked her apartment door, the familiar scent of flour and sugar from her bakery below offering a fleeting comfort. She walked through her small living room, her gaze falling upon the framed photos on her bookshelf, her parents, her best friend, moments of simple joy. Would this man, this powerful, dangerous man, truly allow her to keep this life? Or was it all a pretense, a way to slowly, subtly, consume her entire existence? She collapsed onto her sofa, burying her face in her hands. She was a baker, for heaven's sake. Her biggest worry until now had been perfecting her croissant recipe or dealing with a sudden rush of customers. Now, she was entangled with a man who spoke of eliminating loose ends and untying threads in a world of shadows and unforgiving consequences. The thought of being constantly watched, of having her every move monitored, was anathema to her independent spirit. The next morning dawned gray and humid, mirroring the turmoil in Elara's mind. She hadn't slept, tossing and turning, caught in a relentless loop of Valerius's words, his piercing gaze, and the chilling implications of his arrangement. Her usual morning ritual of brewing coffee and planning the day's baking felt hollow, overshadowed by an impending dread. The doorbell rang precisely at 9, a sharp, insistent sound that made her jump. It wasn't the delivery driver, or a neighbor. It was him. Or rather, one of his people. Taking a deep breath, Elara walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit stood on her stoop, his expression impassive. He was tall, with a strong, silent presence that was both intimidating and oddly reassuring in its professionalism. She opened the door, her heart thudding. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," the man said, his voice deep and neutral. "Mr. Thorn sends his regards. My name is Silas. I am here to escort you." Silas didn't wait for her reply, simply gestured towards a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the gray sky. Elara felt a surge of indignation. This wasn't an invitation, it was an order. She wanted to refuse, to slam the door and pretend this nightmare wasn't real, but the memory of Valerius's cold threat, I cannot guarantee your safety," echoed in her mind. With a sigh of resignation, she grabbed her small handbag and stepped out, locking the door behind her. The short drive to Valerius's penthouse was conducted in silence. Silas was a man of few words, his attention focused entirely on the road. Alara stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of the city pass by, feeling an immense disconnect from the bustling normalcy unfolding outside. She was being driven into a world she didn't belong in, a world she hadn't asked for. When they arrived, Silas led her directly to Valerius's office. The room felt less intimidating in the morning light, but no less opulent. Valerius was already seated at his large desk, a tablet in his hands, his dark suit impeccable. He looked up as she entered, his gaze sweeping over her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Alara," he greeted, his voice smooth, devoid of any discernible emotion. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to the same armchair she had occupied yesterday. She sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I?" she countered, her voice sharper than she intended. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Valerius's lips. "As I said, Alara, you always have a choice. But some choices are simply more prudent than others." He set the tablet down, leaning back in his chair. "Have you given thought to our discussion?" "I haven't thought about anything else," she admitted, her gaze unwavering. "And I don't like it. I don't like being watched, I don't like being threatened, and I certainly don't like being forced into an arrangement I never asked for." Valerius listened, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on hers. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, allowing her words to hang in the air. "I understand your apprehension," he finally said, his voice low and steady. "But I assure you, this is for your own good. The incident you witnessed, it was not a random act. It was a message. And that message, unfortunately, puts you in a precarious position. My surveillance, as you call it, is a necessary shield. Think of it as a small price to pay for your continued safety, and for the security of your business." He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a slightly softer edge. "I have already taken steps to ensure your bakery's continued success. A few, anonymous investments have been made, securing your lease for the next decade and upgrading some of your equipment. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. A down payment on our understanding." Alara stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Anonymous investments? Upgrading her equipment? He had already started to weave his influence into her life, without her consent, without her knowledge. A part of her was furious at the intrusion, at the blatant manipulation. But another part, a small, pragmatic part, recognized the undeniable benefit. Her bakery, her life's work, was suddenly more secure than it had ever been. You had no right," she stammered, even as the shock began to give way to a strange, unwelcome relief. Valerius merely raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps not in your world, Alara. But in mine, such preemptive measures are often necessary. They demonstrate intent. And they ensure compliance." His gaze intensified, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his eyes. "You are a woman who values her independence, her craft. I respect that. And I have no desire to diminish it. Only to protect it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, drawing her in. "The world I inhabit is complex, dangerous. But it also offers opportunities. Protection, resources, a certain level of immunity from the mundane struggles of life. All of this can be yours, Alara, if you simply accept the parameters of our arrangement." The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous dance between defiance and a growing, unsettling attraction. She hated him for his power, for his presumption, for pulling her into his dark world. But she couldn't deny the magnetic pull, the strange fascination he held. He was a force of nature, and she, a humble baker, was caught in his powerful current. What exactly do these parameters entail on a daily basis? She asked, her voice tight, trying to bring the conversation back to concrete terms, to escape the intoxicating swirl of his presence. How much of my life will truly be my own? Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. Valerius's lips curved into that faint, almost imperceptible smile again, a gesture that never quite reached his eyes but sent a strange flutter through Alara's stomach. Your life, Alara, will remain largely your own. You will continue to run your bakery, live in your apartment, pursue your passions. However, he paused, his gaze sharpening, there will be certain adjustments. You will have a dedicated security detail, discreetly positioned, always aware of your movements. You will be provided with a secure communication device for emergencies. And, from time to time, I will require your presence. For discussions, for events, for anything I deem necessary to maintain our understanding. He watched her closely, gauging her reaction. Think of it as a subtle integration, not an annexation. Your autonomy is not being stripped, merely supplemented. Alara felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. The idea of constant surveillance was still deeply unsettling, a violation of the privacy she cherished. Yet, the mention of her bakery's security, the subtle upgrades he'd already implemented, gnawed at her resistance. It was a golden cage, perhaps, but one that offered undeniable protection in a world that had suddenly turned terrifyingly unpredictable. She imagined the quiet anxiety that would plague her if she refused, the constant looking over her shoulder, the fear for her business. Valerius Thorn might be a devil, but he was a devil offering a formidable shield. And what about the incident? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The reason all of this started? Is it over? Valerius's expression grew serious, the last vestiges of that almost smile vanishing. The immediate threat has been neutralized. The message was delivered and received. However, in my world, there are always ripples. Always consequences. My role, and by extension, yours, is to navigate those ripples without capsizing. Your presence, your association with me, serves as a deterrent. It sends a clear signal that you are under my protection. And in this city, my protection is absolute. His words, though chilling, carried an undeniable weight of reassurance. He wasn't just offering security, he was promising an impenetrable fortress. Alara took a deep, shaky breath. She was trapped, yes, but perhaps, in this strange, dangerous dance, she could find a new kind of strength. She had always been resilient, a survivor. This was just a new, far more complicated challenge. All right, she said, her voice firmer now, a spark of her old defiance returning. I'll agree to your arrangement. But I have conditions. Valerius raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in his dark eyes. Conditions? Yes, Alara stated, meeting his gaze directly. First, my bakery. It remains mine. You don't interfere with its operations, its staff, or its creative direction. Your investments are appreciated, but the artistic control is mine. Second, my personal life. While I understand the need for security, I expect a level of respect for my privacy. No unnecessary intrusions, no listening in on my calls unless absolutely critical. And third, I want to understand. I want to know enough about this world, your world, to make informed decisions. I won't be a puppet, Valerius. I need to be an active participant in my own protection. A slow, genuine smile finally spread across Valerius's face, transforming his features, softening the sharp edges of his authority. It was a rare sight, and it sent a jolt through Alara, a strange mix of relief and a burgeoning, unsettling attraction. Reasonable requests, Alara, he said, his voice laced with a newfound warmth. All of them. Your bakery is your sanctuary. And I respect that. Your privacy will be guarded, not violated. And as for understanding, that is a journey we will embark on together. knowledge, in my world, is power. And I believe you are intelligent enough to wield it. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, captivating. Welcome, Alara Vance, to a world you never asked for, but one that may, surprisingly, offer you more than you ever imagined. Over the next few months, Alara's life transformed in ways she never could have conceived. Silas, the silent, imposing man, became a constant, unobtrusive presence. He was always there, a shadow in her periphery, yet never intrusive. Her bakery thrived under the subtle influx of capital and the unexpected, high-profile clientele that Valerius's influence brought. She found herself baking for exclusive events, her creations becoming renowned in circles she'd never known existed. Her interactions with Valerius became more frequent, and surprisingly, more complex. He would summon her to his penthouse, not always for serious discussions, but sometimes for a quiet dinner, or simply to talk. She learned about his past, a fragmented narrative of loss and betrayal that had forged him into the formidable man he was. He spoke of his family's legacy, the burden of leadership, the constant vigilance required to maintain peace in a world perpetually teetering on the brink of chaos. He was still cold, still guarded, but with her, a subtle vulnerability began to emerge. He listened to her stories about the bakery, about her dreams, with an intensity that made her feel truly seen, truly heard. The tension between them, that initial spark of fear and fascination, slowly, inexorably, began to shift. It morphed into a potent, undeniable chemistry. Their conversations, initially formal and guarded, became laced with charged silences, lingering glances, and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. He would catch her looking at him, a flicker of something raw in his dark eyes, and she would feel a blush creep up her neck. He was dangerous, yes, but he was also captivating. Intelligent, and, in his own way, fiercely protective. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting where Alara, armed with her newfound understanding, had offered a surprisingly insightful perspective on a delicate negotiation, Valerius dismissed his advisors.